Orbital night fell before their dread fleet, a manufactured eclipse, cast by the bellies of 1,000 predator ships. Solar panels on the world below flickered and died, and the sea turned mirror black under an artificial aurora as coils of charged particles combed the upper atmosphere. In command alcoves filled with cold vapor and violet glyphs, Xerix officers pulsed orders down the chain. Ultraviolet brief, radio loud, subharmonic absolute. Warlord Kyrix watched Tarnus for become a silhouette in his forward blister. The planet had been tagged EG-1779, low value, subsurface hostile, which to the Xerix meant one thing: fast harvest, fast purge. A world to be added to the ledger before breakfast. He flexed the plates of his fur carapace, listening to the comfortable grind of seam and seam. His body had been grown for this armor, folded like cathedral buttresses, over muscle spun from glass proteins, nerves insulated in opal. To the Xerix, beauty was function superbly expressed, and Kyrix was beautiful in the way of a guillotine. Surface skin complete, rasped the tactician to his left. Thermal shows vacancy, no signatures exceeding to digits. Civil architecture intact, transit arteries evacuated. Evacuated to where? Kyrix asked, not because he needed an answer, but because he wanted the bridge to hear the thought and know he had already measured the absence. Down, replied the tactician. All vectors downward. Tarnisfer was a dim jewel marbled in slate and iron red. It boasted a ring of tired satellites and a litter of space junk, caught in useless orbitronics of a species that had once reached outward, and then, wisely or not, had recoiled. Fractured continents were laced with sinkholes and cathedral caves whose mouths yawned like wounds. The Xerix dossier named the resident species Grimspawn. Other cultures had less technical names: the Taker Brood, the Night Choir, the Below Legend. Kyrix knew was simply data with its limbs torn off. He did not traffic in legend. Begin the opening hymn, he ordered. The dread fleet sang to the ionosphere. Coils spun and hurled down lances of white fire. The first bombardment wasn't meant to kill. It was meant to talk. Xerix fire spoke a grammar of terror, searing away calm's grids, melting runways into obsidian, snapping power relays so that cities coughed and went silent. A proper invasion did not waste soldiers against prepared walls. It made walls forget what they were. On the third pass, the war barges released their atmospheric brood, coffin-black dropships that rode ablative comets through the upper air, shedding skins, blazing like meteors and then becoming suddenly indecently graceful as fins unfolded and gravity surrendered to precision. Legions poured into the sky on threads of contrail. They fell in silence, each warrior webbed in a cocoon of shock absorption gel that tasted faintly of copper and ozone. Kyrix sent a message down the drop: stride, burn, find the pulse of this world. Sergeant Hross received it as a taste behind his eyes. He was young enough to be eager and old enough to have lost 3 limbs in the Celt Revolt and regrown them stronger. As his pod hit, the gel carapace peeled like fruit. The street he stepped onto gleamed with a thin coat of vitrified dust. 30-story towers leaned like headstones. Glossy windows reflected only the ships above. A line of public bikes lay exactly parallel on a curb, as if their last riders had dismounted in calm. Empty, said Hross across the squad band. Smell? Asked his lieutenant. Hross tasted with his antennae. He expected oil, panic sweat, the copper of fresh blood. He found only cold stone and the high, dry tang of ancient earth-given air. Under that, far under, something mineral and wrong, like the echo of a bell rung in a deep well. He motioned his fire team forward. They moved as Xerix did, confidently, triangles inside triangles, guns grown into forelimbs, vents flexing with a predator's patience. They breached a transit station with textbook efficiency and found a children's mural untouched by soot, a scatter of drop toys, a bag of sliced fruit browning in air that had been clean an hour ago. On the platform, steel doors yawning into the earth, freight lifts hanging open like tongues let loose. A single message had been daubed across a wall in viscous black-red. Crusted and flaking. Rest sent a photo. The bridge translated it not into words but into feeling. We go to kin. Do not follow. Pursue, Kyrix said, and the order bit like winter. Seal the surface. Flood the subsurface with scouts. Mark all heat pocks for sterilization. Across Tarnus for the same tableau repeated. Empty street grids, sleeping screens, meals uneaten. From the planet's equatorial megacity to a rust-scabbed port town, where salt wind chewed paint from facadas, Xerix squads found the same careful departure. No barricades, no stray shots from desperate civilians, no last stands. Tarnus had left the surface the way a patient leaves a room before an operation begins. When the first scout crawlers dropped into the subsurface, the world took a breath. The tunnels were not one civilization's work. They were layered strata of ambition and fear. The topmost metro tubes still housed blinking platform signs, and vending machines making their lonely, pre-programmed suggestions. Beneath them ran maintenance galleries of excavators deprecated by dust. Beneath that, galleries cut by melt lances and boring worms. Beneath that, veins of God's own geology where basalt folded like taffy and quartz kept old lightning. Xerix scanners painted it, a web with a center somewhere dark. Cross's team took a freight shaft, their boots magnetized to a cage that stank of lubricants and the fat scent of recently warm metal. They descended to a platform that had been repurposed into a staging space. The floor was rubbed smooth by many feet. There were scratch marks on the pillars, not random, but written in some claw-born cipher. Arcs and ticks that repeated at regular intervals like verses, contacts. The lieutenant asked. Sounds, Cross said. Not ours. There are kinds of quiet that are simply the absence of sound, and kinds that are a presence all their own. What spoke to Hras then was the second kind, a quiet that felt like pressure, like heat and weight. His armor vibrated, faint and intermittent, as if the tunnel itself had a heartbeat. They moved past the platform into a cathedral, a natural cavern swallowed and reworked by hands without love for symmetry. Stalactites had been lashed with braided cables, stalagmites carved to stumps to widen the floor. Pits had been covered with steel grill to create a grid that looked, to Hras's eye, like the inside of a hunting trap. Thermals spiking. Someone whispered. 9 o'clock, 18 meters. Shapes moved at the edges of the Xerix headlamps, their hides refusing to gleam. The Grimspawn had no use for evolution's usual bargains. They had forelimbs jointed like questions and jaws that hinged afar, and skin the color of wet midnight. They came from different heights and widths, as if stamped from a template that encouraged only function. Runners with needle teeth, ponderous bulk lifters with crushing knuckles, thin ones whose heads quivered with sense organs like combs. Hras's breastplate registered impact pebbles, then larger debris. The Grimspawn were throwing the cavern at them, open, the lieutenant said. And the squad did, a disciplined volley, shock lances stripping the air into blue-white threads. Rounds struck. The Grimspawn bled nothing Hras could see. Where a limb should have sheared, it flexed. Where a chest should have caved, it rippled like fluid catching a stone and then smoothed. Center mass ineffective, a private reported, voice clipped. Beautiful. Target joints, Hras said. They did. Things fell. They did not die. The cavern became heat and motion. Xerix soldiers were bred to love this, to let everything unnecessary burn out of their heads and become angles entry, exit, arc, recoil. Hras killed 3. He broke the neck of a 4th with the heel of his weapon. He stepped left to give his comrade a lane and right to keep his own. And in the middle of that perfect arithmetic he felt it, not fear rising, but fear arriving like weather rolling over a plain. It did not belong to him. A Grimspawn skittered toward him and mid-lunge collapsed as if a puppeteer had cut the cords. Another slammed its palms into the grill, then froze, joints rigid, jaws trembling, a ragged keening bubbling up from a throat that had not made that sound even under fire. One by one the shapes at the edge of the light halted. Necks canted as if listening to a music the Xerix could not hear. Their clicking speech ceased. The cavern's heartbeat became a drum. Record everything, Kyrix said on the command band. Very softly, as if speech itself might startle the data. Hras turned his headlamp. The beam cut a clean seam across the black and found a passage that had not been carved by tools. It looked eroded by direction, as if many bodies had moved in one way for so long they had instructed stone to obey. From that passage a breath moved cold, not in temperature, but in tendency, a subtractive draft. It smelled of copper that had forgotten the sun. of storm rains that fell before there were skies to fall through. Every Grimspawn in the hall lowered itself, not from exertion, but in a posture that matched nothing Hross had seen them use in combat. Spines flattened, arms tucked, heads bowed. The posture was not submission. It was recognition. The lieutenant's voice had become a wire. What are they? A tremor climbed the walls like a note tuning itself. Above ground, Kyrex's Dreadfleet recorded anomalies across a dozen spectra. Interferometers miscounted their own ticks. Gravimeters produced numbers that would be funny if numbers could be funny. On a ridge outside the city, a Xerix artillery crew felt their gun become a statue and could not name why. Report. Kyrex demanded. Movement, Hross said. His own voice sounded very far away. Large, no. Not large, total. He didn't see it, not yet. He felt it first, the way every hard edge in the cavern seemed to soften as if re-evaluated by something patient and precise. The way the air ahead of them began to carry a slow rhythm that matched not the Xerix double heart, not the Grimspawn lattice heart, but something older. Like waves against a shore so long eroded it had become the idea of a shore. A small Grimspawn child of such a thing existed edged forward on elbows. It put one claw to the stone and tapped 3 times. Tap, tap, tap. The sound came back multiplied. Tapping from far below. 3, then 6. Then a choir of 3s echoing out of angles that space should not have had. The child keened again. Softer, and pressed its head to the floor in a gesture Hross, to his own surprise, recognized, not worship, but greeting. Why do they retreat? Kyrex's navigator asked on the bridge, watching other caverns on other tactical windows as the Grimspawn peeled away from kill lanes. They had prepared with mathematical malice. On a coastal plain, Xerix armor rolled forward into a valley of jigsaw basalt and found the enemy stepping aside to make a corridor. In a sinkhole city where the air tasted like iron filings and sleep, the Grimspawn abandoned terraces carved for crossfire and gathered at the lip of a black throat. Like mourners awaiting a procession, they're not retreating, the tactician said. Pupils blown wide, violet text skittering across his fur carapace. They're making room. Room for what? Someone on a lower deck dared to ask. The cavern in front of Hross breathed again. He still hadn't seen the thing the Grimspawn meant, but he understood a fact stitched into soldiering since the first species lifted a club. If the enemy, mid-battle, chooses to bow, one does not assume victory. One assumes arrival. Mark this position, Kyrex said, voice flanging as interference licked at it. Fix all troops. No pursuit. We do not run at what makes the enemy kneel. Hross swallowed a taste like lightning. He raised his weapon, because that is what training placed in his hands when understanding failed. The cavern's far threshold dilated not like a door opening, but like a pupil adjusting to light. The war-born sky above Tarnisfor was very far away. Down here, under mountains and history, something older than war drew a breath, and the Grimspawn, destroyers of armies, slid to the floor the way children slide to sit at a friend's feet. Their history was written in conquest and logic, in the cold calculus of campaigns stretching back 1,000 generations. Yet as Warlord Kyrex stared into the shimmering hololith of Tarnis the Fourth subcrustal networks and the data streams that refused to make sense, he realized that logic alone might not be enough this time. Report, he hissed, every syllable a blade. Subsurface activity increasing, said strategist Vectal, his primary analyst. Grimspawn formations collapsing toward a single vector. Coordinated, deliberate, it is. Ritualistic, ritual. Kyrex's mandibles twitch with contempt. They are beasts. They have no ritual. Vectel did not look up from the glowing map. Then the beasts are learning religion. Across the bridge, the usual disciplined hum of Xerix command was fraying. Data readers whispered impossible readings. Long-range scanners showed gravitational anomalies pulsing from deep beneath Tarnis's surface. Energy signatures, cold, ancient, and immense, were bleeding through rock layers older than recorded time. And then there was the silence. Grimspawn communications, usually a chaotic, multi-frequency storm of hive chatter, had gone eerily quiet. Their tunnels, once alive with motion, were now empty arteries converging toward a single cavern complex, Something was coming. Something the Grimspawn wanted to rive. The chamber of Bow Sergeant Hross's platoon had secured a vantage point near one such convergence. They were perched on the lip of an immense, circular cavern, a natural geoda reshaped by intelligence. Obsidian walls hummed with faint bioelectric pulses. Geometric carvings spiraled inward toward a massive opening, a tunnel so wide and deep it looked less like a passage and more like a wound in the planet's flesh. And lining the cavern, in precise, concentric rings, were thousands of Grimspawn. They were silent, motionless, prostrated. Hross's secondary eyes adjusted to the low light. The sight was unlike anything in the Dominion's extensive war records. Grimspawn did not kneel. They did not bow. They killed without hierarchy, without pause. Command, Hross whispered over the link. You need to see this. The visual feed streamed into Kyrix's bridge. He rose from his command throne, mandibles parting in something dangerously close to an ease. Around him, every officer, every battle-scarred veteran of 100 campaigns, stared in wordless disbelief. The Grimspawn weren't preparing for battle. They were welcoming someone, the first science. Seismic sensors caught it first, a tremor, deep and rhythmic. Not tectonic. FOOTFALLS. Then came the pressure wave. A subtle but rising distortion that made Xerix's armor plates vibrate and eyes itch. The air temperature fell by 10 degrees in seconds. Atmospheric particles aligned into magnetic filaments. Even the Dominion's dreadships in low orbit began registering fluctuations. Spacetime ripples radiating upward from beneath the planet's crust. Object emerging. Vectal announced. Mass reading. Fluctuating. Growing. How large? Kyrix asked. Vectal hesitated. It exceeds scanner resolution. Hross and his troops felt it before they saw it. A pull, like gravity's hand on their bones. The massive tunnel ahead exhaled a gust of freezing air, and the bioluminescent glyphs on the walls dimmed, as though bowing to the darkness. Then, light, not illumination, but the opposite of darkness. A shifting, living lattice of geometry. It spilled out of the tunnel and painted the cavern in colors no Xerix spectrum had names for. Something was coming up from below. And the Grimspawn were singing. Carthan or Rivast's first visible part of it was a limb, not mechanical, not biological, but an impossible synthesis of both. It moved with a grace too deliberate for nature, yet too fluid for machinery. Its surface shimmered with ever-changing fractal patterns, like the memory of stars reflected in deep water. Then came the rest of it. Carthun. The being was colossal, at least 50 meters tall, though it seemed to bend space around itself in ways that defied scale. Its torso was an intricate mesh of unknown alloys and sinew-like conduits that pulsed with soft internal light. What might have been a head was an amorphous, ever-shifting crown of eyes, sensors, and mathematical constructs that constantly rearranged themselves as if perceiving reality from multiple dimensions at once. And the Grimspawn, the devourers of worlds, crawled closer on their bellies, keening like hatchlings before a parent. Designation, Carthun, the Xerix translators whispered as they parsed fragments of an ancient, low-frequency broadcast emanating from the creature. Origin, prestellar epoch. Classification, non-hostile. Function, guardian, shepherd. Companion, companion. Hross repeated aloud, his voice hollow. The Grimspawn surged forward to greet Carthun, their chittering harmonizing into a song-like resonance. They touched its legs reverently. One massive alpha creature, a beast twice Hross's size and armed with acid-dripping claws, nuzzled its plating like a pet greeting its owner. The Xerix were warriors, born without fear, but every soldier watching felt something cold bloom beneath their carapace. If this thing was what the Grimspawn called a friend, what did they call an enemy? The voice of the deep-thin Carthun spoke, not in sound, not in language. It projected directly into the minds of every living being within 100 kilometers. Even Xerix neural implants crackled under the weight of the transmission. Some troopers screamed. Others simply dropped to one knee, as though pressed down by gravity itself. The voice was ancient, compassionate, infinite. I have returned, it said, and I remember the stars before they were fire. You, who come with teeth and guns. You are children wielding hammers in a nursery. This world is under my shadow. Its children are under my care. The last words were not a threat. They were a decree, immutable, final. The first retaliation. Kyrex's pride bristled. A lifetime of conquest screamed against surrender. Target the anomaly, he ordered. Full barrage. Maximum yield. Orbital cannons charged. Superheated plasma screamed down from the sky, vaporizing kilometers of rock and atmosphere. Xerx's heavy artillery joined in, saturating the cavern complex with enough firepower to level continents. The result was nothing. The blasts froze mid-air, each shot suspended inches from Carthanes' surface. The plasma cooled, curled, and disintegrated into harmless motes of light. Carthon did not flinch. It did not retaliate. It looked at the Xerx fleet with the quiet disappointment of a parent watching a tantrum. Then, gently, it raised a hand. The Xerx dreadships, each the size of a city, shuddered. One by one, their engines died. Gravitational fields inverted. Ships tumbled like toys, colliding, spiraling helplessly toward the void. Kyrex's flagship groaned as reality itself seemed to bend around Carthanes' will. In less than 60 seconds, the most feared fleet in the Orion Arm was powerless, the fear in the cavern floor. Pross's troops stood frozen. The Grimspawn continued to chant, their hissing hymn rising in reverence. Carthanes' gaze passed over them and lingered on the Xerx soldiers. It was not hatred they felt, not malice. It was pity. And for the first time in the Dominion's long, bloody history, the Xerx understood what it meant to be insignificant. Kyrex watched his empire's might rendered meaningless before this being, this so-called companion, and a sensation clawed its way into his chest. It was not rage. It was not shame. It was something older, deeper. Something the Xerx had evolved beyond, or so they believed. It was fear. The Xerx Dominion had long believed themselves to be the apex of evolution. From the blood-drenched cradle of their homeworld, Xerx Prime, they had clawed their way into the stars, crushing resistance, subjugating species, and reducing empires to ash. In their doctrine, there was no ancient power that could not be outmatched, no god that could not be slain. And yet, here they were, their proud fleet rendered inert in orbit, their weapons useless, their armies paralyzed before a being that did not fight them, but simply unmade their defiance. Carthon did not wage war. It did not need to. The silence of the Dominion. Kyrex stood in the command chamber of the flagship ZDR Heliarch, staring at the holographic projection of Tarnis IV, the once vibrant map with its animated troop markers, orbital strikes, and pulsing zones of conquest was now nearly blank. Grimspawn units no longer registered as hostiles. They were converging peacefully round the entity's location, forming protective rings as if guarding a shrine. Communications with the surface are erratic, said strategist Vectal, mandibles quivering as he scrolled through cascading data. Gravitic interference is destabilizing our relay networks. Carthanes' presence appears to warp space around itself. We can't even open a stable quantum channel. Kyrex's claws drummed against the metal railing, the sound sharp and restless. There must be a weakness. No creature is invulnerable, warlord. Vectal hesitated. It's not a creature. Kyrex turned sharply. Speak clearly. Vectal swallowed, his eyes shifting to the data logs scrolling beside him. Intercepted transmissions, ancient glyphs, and fragments of alien records scavenged from a dozen dead civilizations. Carthon is not a biological entity. It is not mechanical either. Its energy signature predates stellar formation models. By all our calculations, it is older than the galaxy. The bridge went utterly still. For the Xerx, who measured age in conquests, such a statement was almost heretical. What are you saying? Kyrex hissed. I am saying, Supreme Warlord, that we are not fighting a being. Vectal's voice was barely a whisper now. We are facing a relic. Echoes of the first Dawnth archives of the Xerx Dominion were vast. Trophies of knowledge taken from every species they had conquered. Within those forbidden databanks lay fragments of a story older than memory. Few had dared read them. Fewer still had believed them. The fragments spoke of the epic of architects, an era before stars burned, before gravity had shaped galaxies. In that time, entities of incomprehensible power had roamed the primordial void. They were not gods, though lesser species had worshipped them as such. They were not machines, though they shaped matter and energy as easily as breath. They were wardens. caretakers of emerging life, shaping the chaos of the young universe into order. Most had vanished long before sapient life crawled from the seas, but some remained. Carthun was one of them, the shepherds packed deep beneath Tarnisfor. The Grimspawn continued their ritual. Carthun stood motionless in the heart of the cavern, yet its presence was anything but inert. Waves of subtle energy radiated from its form, restructuring minerals, accelerating photosynthesis in subterranean flora, even altering the planet's magnetic field. Every action was deliberate, restorative, protective. The Grimspawn watched with reverence. And then, as if sensing the Xerix observers hidden among the rocks, Carthun spoke again, its voice woven not from sound but from memory itself. "I remember the birth of this brood," the voice said, echoing inside Hross's mind. "I guided them from chaos, taught them to think, to build, to survive. They were monsters once, teeth and hunger. Now they are more. They are mine." Hross felt the words as more than language. They were visions, images of Grimspawn ancestors crawling through molten caverns, hunted by extinction, of Carthun descending from the void, not as a conqueror but as a guardian, reshaping their instincts, weaving intelligence into their genes, binding their chaotic evolution into a coherent species. The Grimspawn were not conquerors by nature. They were engineered to survive, and Carthun was the architect of that survival. The Dominion's responseon the surface. Panic had begun to erode the iron discipline of the Xerix war machine. Entire battalions had gone silent after brief, garbled transmissions of unidentified phenomena. Orbital bombardments failed to detonate. Energy weapons overloaded at random. It was as if the very laws of physics were shifting around them, bending to Carthun's will. Kyrix, however, refused to yield. "Prepare Omega Protocol," he ordered. The bridge fell silent. Even Vectal looked unsettled. "Warlord, Omega is forbidden. It is necessary." Kyrix's voice was iron. "If we cannot destroy this entity, we will erase the planet. Annihilation protocols. Neutron saturation. Nothing will survive." Vectal hesitated. "And if it survives?" Kyrix turned toward him, eyes burning with cold rage. "Then we will know the shape of the god we must one day kill." The unmaking of Furi Omega Protocol was the Xerix Dominion's ultimate weapon, a chain reaction. Warhead capable of disassembling planetary matter at a molecular level. It had been deployed only twice in recorded history. Both times, the target star systems had ceased to exist. The warhead was launched from orbit, descending toward Tarnisfor like a star falling from heaven. And then, it stopped at an altitude of 70 kilometers. The missile froze in midair. No explosion, no impact, just silence. It hung suspended above the planet, like a leaf caught in a breeze. Carthun turned its faceless gaze upward. "Children with fire," the voice said, louder now, reverberating through every Xerix ship, every suit of armor, every neural implant. "You seek to destroy what you cannot understand. I have seen this before, and I have ended it before." The warhead dissolved, molecule by molecule, atom by atom, until there was nothing left but stardust. The weight of history's Xerix Dominion had never faced a defeat it could not explain. Until now. Kyrix gripped the edge of the hololith table, his claws gouging deep into the metal. All his life, he had believed strength was the final arbiter of truth. But strength meant nothing here, Warlord. Vectal said softly. "We are insects gnashing our mandibles at a supernova." The words stung, not because they were wrong, but because they were true. Kyrix looked back at the hollow, unreadable projection of Carthun. "This is not over," he growled. "If this being shaped the Grimspawn, it can be studied. If it can be studied, it can be replicated, controlled, weaponized." But even as he spoke, a cold realization gnawed at the back of his mind. The Dominion had spent millennia perfecting the art of war. And war, it seemed, had just become irrelevant, the whisper of the future far below. In the depths of Tarnisfor, Carthun turned its attention to the stars beyond. It had seen countless empires rise and fall. It had witnessed arrogance give way to ashes, and in the Xerix Dominion's defiance, it saw yet another pattern it had known since the dawn of time. The voice that echoed in Hross's mind now carried a trace of something almost like sadness. "You are not the first to try. You will not be the last, but the universe is vast, and I am older than your hunger. You will leave this place, child of war, and one day, when the stars themselves have grown old and dim, you will understand why. And in that moment, as the Xerix fleet, humbled and broken, drifted helplessly above Tarnisfor, the universe itself seemed to hold its breath. For in the shadow of Carthun, the Dominion had glimpsed a truth they could never unsee. They were not conquerors. They were children playing at war before something far older, far wiser, and infinitely more powerful than they could ever comprehend. In their language, the closest term was Kyrzik, to pause and strike anew, even in defeat. They always believed the war was merely postponed, never lost. Yet as the dread fleet drifted powerless above Tarnisiv, and Carthun's presence rippled like a heartbeat through the void, even that proud defiance began to falter. Warlord Kyrix stood alone in the observation chamber of the flagship ZDR Heliarch, staring down at the planet below. The once scorched surface was now blooming with strange vitality, radiation clouds thinning, bioluminescent flora unfurling across blasted plains, even tectonic stresses easing beneath the crust. Carthun's influence was remaking the world as if, healing a wound, the Dominions might have been rendered meaningless, and the one thing they had always believed impossible, fear, had become their closest companion. The Council of the Broken Status of the Fleet, Kyrix demanded, though he already knew the answer. 3 carriers are functional at 20% capacity. Vectal reported grimly. The rest are adrift. Weapon systems remain offline. Engine matrices are, he hesitated, unresponsive. It's as if the laws of thermodynamics themselves have been rewritten around us, and ground forces. Kyrix's tone sharpened, scattered, demoralized. Many units have gone dark. Communications interference from Carthun continues to worsen. Several squads have surrendered their weapons. Kyrix turned slowly. Surrendered? Yes, Vectal said softly. Not to the Grimspawn. To it. A heavy silence settled over the command deck. The idea was unthinkable. Xerix warriors, bred, conditioned, and sculpted over centuries to know nothing but conquest, now kneeling before an alien being. As the Grimspawn did. It was more than humiliation. It was heresy. The messenger, a sudden pulse, rippled through the bridge, a wave of energy so subtle it passed through armor and bone without resistance. Moments later, a visual feed appeared on every display. UNBIDDEN. It was KAR single quotes THUN. The being loomed against a background of molten stone and flowing light. Yet its presence seemed neither distant nor near, as if it existed simultaneously. In every part of the ship, its fractal crown shifted slowly, and when it spoke, its voice bypassed language entirely, vibrating directly in the minds of every Xerix aboard. Children of metal and bone, why do you rage against the tide? You are clever, you are strong, but strength without purpose is a flame that consumes all it touches. The Grimspawn learned this truth. Once they were as you are, devourers, destroyers. Then they listened. On the ground below, Pross's platoon watched as Carthun extended one vast hand. The Grimspawn pressed against it like offspring greeting an ancient parent. For the first time, Pross did not see monsters. He saw a people, guided, nurtured, elevated. I do not wish to end you, the voice continued. I wish to teach you, but the universe is changing. It no longer belongs to those who only take. It belongs to those who build, who guard, who remember. The debate of the warlords horrors later. The Dominion's senior command convened in the war chamber, a place once filled with the triumphant planning of invasions. Now it was heavy with doubt. They speak as gods, hissed High Marshal Krith, her armor still scorched from the failed planetary assault. But gods can be killed. We should regroup, rally the fleets from the outer colonies, and then do what? Krith? Vectal interrupted. Throw more lives into a void that swallows every weapon we wield. You saw what it did to Omega Protocol. It erased a planet killer like a child snuffing out a candle. Krith's mandibles clicked furiously. Then we die with honor. Kyrix remains silent, gazing into the war map, now dominated by a single pulsing icon at Tarnis the Fourth's core. The name beneath it was written in glyphs that translated to only one word, Carthun, honor, he finally said, is a lie we tell ourselves to avoid admitting fear. The chamber fell quiet. Kyrex's eyes swept across the faces of his generals, some defiant, some broken, most hollow. We have two paths before us. One, we fight. We throw everything we have, everything we are, at this thing, and we burn with the satisfaction that we tried. He turned toward the planet below, where the Grimspawn were now rebuilding their ruined cities under Carthunesque guidance, towering structures rising from the earth like crystalline blossoms. Or two, we listen, we learn, we evolve. The test of will as the Dominion's leaders debated. Carthun appeared again, this time in physical form. It rose from the depths of Tarnus IV and ascended into orbit, surrounded by a halo of gravitational distortions. Every sensor on every ship failed. Time itself seemed to stagger as the entity approached. And then, impossibly, it knocked on the flagship's hull. A deep, resonant vibration echoed through the heliarch, not violent but patient, a request, not a demand. Kyrex felt his legs move before he could command them. Flanked by elite guards, he made his way to the docking chamber. As the airlock hissed open, the Xerix warlord came face to face with Carthun for the first time. It was even larger up close, a walking cathedral of unknowable design, every surface shifting with purpose. It did not radiate hostility. It radiated inevitability. "You have fought well," Carthun said, its voice a chorus of galaxies. "Few species have dared challenge me in the long silence of eternity. But war is not your destiny." Kyrex's claws clenched. "We were born for war." "No," Carthun replied. "You were made for war. There's a difference." The words struck deeper than any weapon. Kyrex opened his mandibles to reply, but no words came. Deep within him, something long buried, curiosity, perhaps stirred for the first time in centuries. "Choose now," Carthun continued. "Remain as you are, and your kind will fade into memory. Or walk a harder path, the path of those who learn, who change, who grow." The Grimspawn chose. "Will you?" The final choicelance fell across the Xerix dominion, on the flagship, in the shattered legions, in the deepest corners of their empire. Every warrior, every strategist, every citizen felt the weight of that choice press upon them like a mountain. To yield was unthinkable. To persist was impossible. Kyrex's mind raced through centuries of conquest, the battles won, the worlds taken, the civilizations erased. All of it had led them here, to a single decision that would define their species for millennia to come. Finally, the warlord who had never once spoken the word mercy lowered his weapon. "Teach us," he said. Carthun's form shifted subtly, as though smiling without a mouth. "Then your war is over, and your true journey begins." Epilogue. A different sky years passed. Tarnus IV became a place of pilgrimage not for conquest, but for knowledge. Xerix and Grimspawn worked side by side, guided by Carthun's vast and patient wisdom. The Dominion's fleets, once engines of annihilation, now ferried aid and technology to worlds on the brink of collapse. Their warriors became explorers. Their warlords became ambassadors. They were still fierce, still proud, but they had learned that strength was not measured in how much one could destroy, but in how much one could protect. And as the centuries turned, the legend spread across the stars that the devourers of worlds had knelt before something far greater than themselves, that the Grimspawn, once monsters, now called a being older than time friend, and that even the most fearsome warriors in the galaxy had frozen in terror, not of death, but of a truth they had never known. There is no greater power than the one that chooses not to destroy,